was, that was the trick, right?
Yeah. And you had to balance the empathy of it, because it's very easy in a sense where it's too much, because he does feel that much. So sometimes on screen you have to say, look, we got to back up a little bit, otherwise it's too much. Because he had such a heart to him that literally.
You don't want to get sappy.
You don't want it to get sappy, and you had to restrain that a little bit to pull that in to get that.
So you get real hands-on sometimes with the actors in terms of
when you do. I like to, I was sort of you can say it's like a controlled freedom. Is that I want an actor to feel very free within it to try any particular thing, but at the same time, there's a limitation to it. But you don't want to push the limitation, because that would restrict what we might do. Because there's these moments, it goes this way or that way, and it was there was a lot of fun to take certain scenes and then just see what would happen if we did this,
right?
And for instance, there's a scene in the film, and I said to him one day, I said, I have to find a scene for you where you see how much you mean to the troops. Because otherwise it's an abstract. You're in a radio booth and you're doing this comedy, but you don't hear laughs. And so therefore you don't know, cause and effect really. You know that they like you, but you don't hear it. You're never there. And so he said, well, what do we do? I said, why don't we just have there's a traffic jam and all the trucks are backed up, and then you're stuck and somehow they know it's you. And then you end up doing it to you start playing around with the soldiers, and now you got the cause and effect, and you see how important you are to these soldiers.
Oh yeah. And I'm sure Robin really fought that idea, I bet, huh? Here, you get to perform for people. Oh, so I can't do it.
And that's how that sort of came about.
Uh-huh.
And it was tough. It was tough for him in this regard, because a bunch of these, because we're over there in Thailand, and I end up throwing this thing, and now we got to get soldiers, right?
Right.
And so we end up with just getting, a bunch of people, and then some of them are from other countries. They don't even understand English.
Right.
They're in there. They don't know what the hell he's saying. And he had to find a way, to work with that.
Oh, that must have been great for him. Yeah.
I don't know, because, he's got to adapt to it, and he's so smart. He'd find ways to, just by sounds and things that people do.
Yeah.
And they'll pull people in.
He was a sweet guy. I mean, I guess it's terribly sad, and when you think about it, he's definitely missed. And I just think what you're talking about is empathy and stuff. He was a very, really, when you talk to him or when you know him for a little bit, he's a very quiet, shy guy. It's just he's definitely absorbing things and engaged, but by nature not. He had to turn that shit on.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
So the other thing I was realizing about, obviously with Avalon, you kind of depicted where you come from, but I was thinking about Bugsy, because I was thinking about that movie, and I just had this realization this morning that because I remember knowing enough about the mob to know that Warren Beatty was much older than Bugsy ever made it to, right?
Yeah. But by, I don't know, 10, 12 years.
Yeah, but then I started to realize, with these stories, what fucking difference does it make?
Right. Yeah, right. Gee, wasn't Bugsy, he wasn't 30, he was only 39 at the time. Yeah.
But there's this, the idea of historical accuracy is relative in some cases, but in the cases of these mythic stories about, criminals or cowboys or whatever, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's really about the story, right?
Yes, it's the character that's being portrayed, as opposed to the authenticity of age or other certain things. Because look, sometimes you can stray too far, and therefore it ultimately undermines the character, because you've so altered it that it doesn't quite work or make sense. But in terms of age, at times it doesn't matter unless the age is really an issue in the film. You know what I mean? If the guy was 25 and died, then he did that, and you got a guy who's 50, it doesn't work. So I think whenever you're doing a film, you always have to sort of say, how important is this to the story we're telling?
Yeah.
And how much will it affect how we process it?
Yeah. And I didn't realize until like maybe today that, you kind of invented or was, at the beginning of this prestige TV idea. The idea, that you seem to be one of the first to figure out that you could do TV with the same quality of movies, even on an episodic level, right? With Homicide and Oz for sure.
Look, because I came out of television, and television has an important place as opposed to just features. Because when I originally got the book, Simon's book on Homicide, it was about developing it as a film. And I thought, no, it's better as a television series because you can just let these stories play out. And then, fortunately, at that time, I was able to, I said, look, I'd like to shoot it. Because back then it was like, well, you'll do some exteriors and you do all the interiors in LA. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's not going to be realistic to me. And I said, I'd like to shoot it in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And they said, well, the cost and whatever. And I said, well, but what we'll do is we'll just basically shoot on 16 millimeter, which Super 16, which no network show was ever on Super 16. And no show was handheld on Super 16.
What would they do? What would they take out there? 35 millimeter on the street?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so I thought, by having a little handheld Super 16, we could have a raggedness and let the raggedness be part of the show. Because there's an edginess about it. And I thought, and again, it goes back to my youth. I loved Naked City when I was a kid.
Right.
I loved that television show. And that was shot on the streets of New York. And so I thought, gee, I wonder if I could just do that for Baltimore and we can be even more ragged than Naked City was in its time. And so that's how it evolved.
And was Simon happy with it initially? Has he always been okay?
Well, he was. That's how that's when he started to write, because we brought him in. He became one of the writers on the show.
Yeah,
and that's where he started to make that real transition from a journalist to a writer.
And you say, and you got Richard Belzer a new life.
Yes, I heard we were about to cast some other actor. And I thought, this guy's not bad, but I don't know how surprising, I said, maybe I need to get some guy that's and I couldn't quite explain it, so we need some guy that's something different or whatever. And I was riding in my car and I was listening to Howard Stern, and Belzer was on Howard Stern.
Yeah.
And I was listening to him in the rhythms that he had. And I thought, I wonder if he could be an actor. And so he came in, he read, he wasn't particularly good. And I said, well, why don't we come back one more time and just sort of, you kind of know it, so you're just talking like you would do if you're doing a stand-up, just so it's more naturalistic. And he got better. He wasn't great at that time, but I thought, with a little bit more time, I think he can land this character. And that's how it happened.
And I didn't realize also, before I forget, that you wrote And Justice for All.
Yeah.
With, was she your wife at the time?
Yes, Valerie Curtin. Yeah.
So you wrote, you're out of order. I'm out of order. You're out. That's one of those Marty lines, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's very much so. That came about because of, the diner guys that grew up. And one in particular became a lawyer.
Uh-huh.
And so when I would go back and visit and we would talk, and he was telling me, he said, something, the legal system is so screwed up. He said, you always get this Perry Mason kind of law shows or whatever. He says, it's chaos. Yeah. It's chaos. It's madness. And so we started talking, and he was telling me stories, and I started gathering the stories. And And then I was telling, Valerie, and then ultimately we turned it into a screenplay.
Oh, the chaos. That is exactly it, with Jeffrey Tambor throwing those plates in the hallway.
Yeah, no, the friend of mine was saying, you don't understand. He was telling me about the fact that, some judges, carried guns in the courtroom.
Jack Warden, he was so good.
Jack Warden with a gun and stuff. And he was telling me, he said, it's another, you don't understand how crazy it is. People coming in for a case or whatever, and they got the wrong client. I mean, he said, he was telling many, many stories, and that's how it happened.
And that movie did well. And that was how did that get set up with Jewison and everything?
We wrote it and we gave it to a producer named Joe Wazan. Yeah. And Joe Wazan gave it to Norman Jewison, who really responded to it. And then he wanted Pacino. Then basically Al wanted a big reading, of it, have some reading to make sure that that's what he wanted to do, which I have to tell you was one of the worst experiences that I can remember, because Jewison's got all these actors in this conference room in the evening. Starts to go good, and then Al gets a little quieter, because he's thinking, because now I know him well, but so he's getting a little quieter, So then the other actors not wanting to show him up, they get a little quiet. Yeah. And then Al is like thinking as he's going over this. Now he's taking long time to say things. Now they're getting a little slower. Yeah. So it's getting quieter, and then it's getting slower and slower and slower, to the point that I didn't even know what the story was anymore. I couldn't even, I looked at Valerie and said, what in the world? This is a disaster, a total disaster. Yeah. Go back to the hotel. It's about 1:00 in the morning. And Joe Wazan calls and says, Al loves it. And that's how it happened.
And he was a big star at that time, right? That was his time.
He's one of the great, great actors. I've had such a good time.
I'll tell you, man, the Kevorkian movie, You Don't Know Jack.
Yeah, You Don't Know Jack.
You did that for HBO, right?
Yeah.
I really think that's really one of the best performances out of him ever.
He's amazing. He's amazing. He's so great in a sense to work with, and throw ideas around, etc. And he just absorbs certain things, and then he's able to use it, because I said to him before we started shooting, I met with Kevorkian, and so we sit down in the office, and at some point someone came in and says, Jack, would you like some coffee? And he said, yeah, coffee would be good. And he said, they said, decaf? And he said, decaf is for cowards. and I laughed, and he smiled, and he went out. And then I realized he's got this real sense of humor about him. So I said to Al, we have to find little places where we can have a little bit of humor to this character. It'll make it a richer character, because he actually is, fun at times. Yeah. Here's Dr. Death, but he's actually has a sense of humor. And so he said, okay. I said, well, I'll find places for it where we can just sort of mine that periodically, and which we were able to add to it. And he'll try things. I mean, he's very open, and just, I can't say enough about him.
Well, for me, the interesting thing was there was a period there where, he did a couple of roles that were so defining, but they were so over the top, Scent of a Woman, Scarface. The thing is, how do these method guys, how do these huge stars from the 70s, specifically him and De Niro, how do they age? How do they keep working? And De Niro sort of found this new life in comedy, where he's can parody himself pretty well, but he can also do the other thing. But but it's very difficult for some actors not to become this sort of collection of habits and tics that they can just fill up again, So for me, like when I watched the Kevorkian, I was like, he's so capable. They both are, actually, because even De Niro in that movie, The Intern, the one he did with Anne Hathaway, it's actually a great performance. But the way that Pacino can tap into vulnerability, because I mean that's really what made him amazing in the 70s was that even as Michael Corleone, the evolution of that character from the vulnerability